Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to start off by introducing myself before I get started. My name is Emma Scott and I'm a graduate transport planner working at Jacobs. My presentation today is influenced by my individual research project that I conducted during my postgraduate course at Newcastle University, which centered around the role of autonomous vehicles in the everyday mobilities of young people. As a bit of contextual background, this research was an in-depth qualitative study which aimed to bridge the qualitative and quantitative gap present within transportation research. Instead of using transport modelling software or quantitative surveying methods, this research utilised focus groups as the way to explore young people's personal views concerning autonomous vehicles and mobility by drawing upon their own mobile experiences and the potential impact that these new technologies could play in shaping their future mobility. And these findings will be explored further throughout this presentation. So as a bit of structure, this presentation will be split into three main sections. Firstly, we need to understand why autonomous vehicles have been linked to this marginalised group in the first place. And I'll discuss how mobility patterns of young people have and are continuing to change, and the importance that mobility plays in an evolving part of their lives. Autonomous vehicles will be brought into the discussion, looking at the potential benefits that they could bring. And the final section will bridge these two aspects together and present some of the findings from my research project, critically analysing how and if autonomous vehicles will fit into these changing mobility patterns that we are currently witnessing. I'll then open up my presentation to any questions that you might have. Throughout this presentation, I'll make reference to young people. In this, I'm referring to a person between the ages of 15 and 24, as recognised by the United Nations. And discussions focused around autonomous vehicles will be around shared platforms, similar to Uber or Lyft, rather than private car ownership. So firstly, we'll consider the concept of mobility and the influence it has on young people and how mobility is changing for young people. So Peter Adey, who is a professor of human geography, has written extensively about the concept of mobility. And I think one of the best quotes that summarizes the importance of mobility is as follows. In order for me to live, I must move. Being mobile and the concept of mobility is something that we live every day. But because of its mundane nature, it is something that we all do without thinking about. However, it's important to stress that mobility plays a key role for young people because during this phase of their life, they're being confronted with new challenges such as transitioning between schools and university, gaining a first job, and becoming increasingly active in social aspects and political aspects in their daily lives. Being able to be mobile without the need to rely on anyone such as a parent or an older sibling allows young people to forge their own identities and foster new relationships with others. However, mobility patterns of young people are changing. There are a range of social, economic, and environmental factors which are changing the traditional ways in which young people choose to move. For example, demographic changes and changing gender roles are leading women to postpone having children, therefore reducing the need for a private car. Additionally, increasing amounts of young people are choosing to live in cities where the need for a car is reduced and are opting for more environmentally friendly means for getting around a city, such as cycling. Motoring costs have become significantly more expensive, which is discouraging driving, and the cost of learning to drive is ever increasing. And as we are currently witnessing, we're able to carry out increasing jobs at home, which is eliminating the need to travel completely, as tasks can be carried out through a virtual means. So where do autonomous vehicles come into the debate? With young people being less reliant on private car ownership, changing patterns in their everyday mobilities, and a continuing interest in researching and implementing autonomous vehicles onto UK roads, there is the potential that autonomous vehicles could fit into these changing needs. So as a bit of background, autonomous vehicles are categorized into a scale with a level 0, meaning that a vehicle has no autonomous features at all, and a level 5 being completely driverless, i.e. you would request a car, much like an Uber, the car would pick you up, you'd press go, and it would take you to your destination without having to monitor the vehicle. So for my research, I specifically focus on level 5 autonomous vehicles, given that they are said to possess the greatest potential mobility assistance and be that next step change, advancement into a completely inclusive transport system. This is actually underpinned in the DFT's Future of Mobility Urban Strategy paper, in that any new transportation option or mobility innovation needs to be inclusive for all members of society. And if implemented correctly, fully autonomous vehicles could increase productivity, improve road safety, and offer greater mobility to a wider range of people than ever before. So with both these concepts in mind then, how could autonomous vehicles play a role in the everyday lives of young people? Well, the answer is that it's actually quite complicated. There are so many intersecting factors that need to go into a successful implementation. However, the research findings did bring up some common thoughts, feelings, and assumptions towards autonomous vehicles, which could be taken forward when trying to understand how implementation could be done successfully. So the research participants were not involved or linked to transportation anyway. However, they had a good understanding of autonomous vehicles and the targeted benefits that they could bring. These are some of the words and phrases that came up repetitively during the focus group discussions. So most of the participants could name physical examples and companies testing these vehicles, such as Google and Tesla. And some could name actual examples of accidents or incidents which involved these vehicles, which they'd read about in the news or the internet. Additional concepts that were raised was the idea that autonomous vehicles were this science fiction being brought into everyday life, things that they've seen in films like Star Wars or Blade Runner, for example. And because of these futuristic links, many were skeptical about how they would actually function in our normal everyday lives. So I'm going to discuss a few of these examples and some of the interesting thoughts that were raised during these discussions. So whilst the rhetoric surrounding autonomous vehicles and their benefits has been posited as this positive and great innovation, interestingly, most of the participants were actually quite negative towards their implementation. One of the key ideas that was raised repetitively was to do with the tangible and embodied experience of being in a car. The physical lack of a driver or elements of driving, like a steering wheel, we're all accustomed to, changes the sensory experiences of being in a car, or what are known as non-rational factors. The presence or the physical presence of a driver gives the sense of safety, and it highlights for young people's mobility that it's more than simply getting from A to B. It's how we actually move from these 2 points. So the physical infrastructure of these technological advancements is quite solid, but the actual fact of removing a driver and changing the affectivities experienced in the vehicle was raised as being one of the main factors restricting young people from using these vehicles. And additionally, with the journey types that the participants were making, they believe that they wouldn't utilize the full benefits of using an autonomous vehicle. Their journeys are short in nature, and therefore they felt that they would need to make longer journeys in order to gain that productivity benefit that autonomous vehicles could potentially give. However, one participant did acknowledge that if they were cycling, for example, you are not able to use your phone, which is where autonomous vehicles benefit. And of this, the main emphasis that was coming from this point was that they didn't feel the need to spend their journeys doing tasks which are being posited as one of the main benefits of using autonomous vehicles. There was a clear understanding amongst participants that young people have been seen to adopt technologies at quite a rapid rate, and because of this, they feel that companies believe the same will be done with autonomous vehicles, which I think is quite nicely summarized by participant 13's quote there on the right. Unlike smartphones, the physical presence of being in an autonomous car presents a whole range of unknowns and factors that could potentially go wrong, subsequently limiting the extent to which participants would happily get into an autonomous vehicle without thinking of the potential risks or hazards that they may face. They emphasised that they would need to be extensive and a successful track record before they would consider using one. So what does this mean going forward? So from the literature review and the subsequent findings within my research, young people do acknowledge the benefits that autonomous vehicles could offer. However, from their understandings, it's clear that more of the social and embodied aspects of autonomous vehicles needs to be considered before young people would integrate them into their everyday lives. The types of journeys that they're making at this point in their lives wouldn't lend themselves to the full benefits that are offered by the technology. And additionally, one of the underlying concerns still held by young people is that they have limited to no experience in using them. Therefore, trials need to be extensive and inclusive of their age demographic if they are to fully utilize this service in their everyday lives. So with that, I'll thank you very much for listening, and I'll open up my presentation to any questions that you may have.